Let's talk about the dimensions of communication. So there are two dimensions of communication, meaning that every time there's an interaction, there's a content dimension. That's what are we actually talking about, the subject of the message. The subject of the message or the content is typically expressed in verbal, like we're talking with words, or in writing. So it would be vocally. So an example would be, hey, make me 100 copies of this document. Those words are the actual content. Okay, so it's the actual words you're speaking, the message, the verbal message you're sending, whether that's a written message or whether that is language that you're using. And then the other dimension is the relational message. And the relational message really is telling us what the relationship is between the two people in the interpersonal interaction. It could be the feelings, it could be the emotions, it could be how they feel about each other. And this is typically expressed using nonverbal communication. And what's important here is how the words are said. Both in terms of the voice that's used, what's the tone of voice, what's the volume, does it seem like the person is being mean or nice, right? So we're listening for how the words are said, but we're also looking at the visual nonverbals. What is the body language? What's the facial expressions, okay? So anytime we're engaging in communication, we're always paying attention to both of these dimensions. And an example again would be the person says, and this is the content dimensions, make me 1,000 copies of this document. But if she says it like this, hey, make me 1,000 copies of this document, Sam, then he's thinking to himself, is it just me or is she coming on to me, right? Her voice is saying a certain thing. But what if she said, hey, make me 1,000 copies of this document? Then he might be thinking, wow, my boss is really mean, right? So the way that she says the words, that's the relational dimension, okay? Now, when we talk about the relational dimension, we're going to break this down into 3 different types of relational messages. You're going to need to be able to identify all these types. What's important is that the relational dimension is delivered, again, mostly non-verbally. So you really have to pay attention to how the words are said and how does that affect the message, right? So the relational dimension really affects how the other person receives the content dimension. So just like in that slide we just looked at, Sam, we'll call him Sam, he's receiving the message differently depending on how his employer states the message. You know, maybe he's grateful for his job, or maybe he's upset and he wants to quit, right? The way that she says those words, that delivers that relational dimension, and it has an effect on how Sam feels about his boss. Okay, so we're going to look at 3 different relational messages: a relational message of affinity, a relational message of respect, and a relational message of control. So before I go into detail on any of these, I want to just make clear a couple of little things. So when we're talking about interpersonal communication, this is going to sound odd, but when you're sending one message to another person, your actual inside intentions don't matter that much. And the reason that is because what really matters is what is the message the other person gets. So again, if we go back to the boss talking to her employee, if her intention is that she wants Sam to like his job, but she delivers the message in a way that makes him feel bad about his job, again, her message doesn't matter, right? It's really important to keep in mind when we're communicating, the relational message we send, how we make other people feel at the end of the day is all that matters. Again, our intentions just don't matter because nobody can guess your intentions. They'd have to mind read, and we can't expect people to mind read. I know it's a really difficult concept because most of us have learned, like, hey, if you have good intentions, don't worry about what happens, but that's just not the case in real life, okay? So again, what matters is what is the message that gets across to the other person? So what is a relational message? A relational message is the message that gets across to the receiver regarding the relationship between the two people. So let's start with this relational message of affinity. Affinity is just another word for liking or loving. So a relational message of affinity sends a message about what's the level of liking or loving that the person feels about you. Anytime you use relational message of affinity in a sentence, you have to qualify it. So you might say, someone sent a relational message of low affinity, medium affinity, or high affinity. So a relational message of low affinity would mean the person got the message, the person got the message that the other person doesn't like them very much or hates them. A relational message of medium affinity would be, yeah, they like them okay. And a relational message of high affinity would mean they really like them or they really love them. Okay, that's the message they're getting. Again, it's not an actual fact. It doesn't mean they love them or hate them, but they're getting the message that the other person loves them or hates them based on how they are communicating that message. So let's talk about Mona. Mona came in the door and slammed the door when she came home. What kind of a message does this send to Mona's mother? Mona's mother got the message that Mona didn't like her very much because she slammed the door, okay? So when Mona slammed the door, she sent her mother a relational message of low affinity. In reality, Mona loves her mother, but she was having a bad day, okay? So her intent was not to make her mother feel unloved, but in slamming the door, she sent a message of low affinity, okay? So just notice how it's important to use that qualifier, that low affinity, to tell us that Mona sent a message that she doesn't like her mother very much, okay? And again, that's just the message her mother received. It has nothing to do with Mona's intention. So how could Mona send her mother a relational message of high affinity? How could she send the message that she loves her? Well, she could do something nice for her mother. She could, for example, after she slams the door and she realizes what she's done, she could run back downstairs and say, "Mom, I love you," with like a lot of emotion in her voice, or give her mom a hug, or bake her mom a cupcake, right? There's lots of ways that she could send her mother a relational message of high affinity. Let's move on to the second type of relational message, and that's a relational message of respect. When we talk about respect, we're talking about how does someone send a message that they respect your status or culture or your values. So let's look at an example. When John removed his shoes before entering into Yumiko's traditional Japanese household, he sent a relational message of high respect. Okay, so in this case, in taking off of his shoes, because he knows that's Yumiko's tradition, John sent a relational message of high respect. In other words, he really respects her values and her culture. If he had refused to take his shoes off, he may have sent a relational message of low respect. Okay, so again, you want to notice that we used a qualifier to explain that he sent a relational message of high respect. Without that qualifier, the message is unclear. Like if he said he showed her a relational message of respect, we don't know. We don't know if that's high respect, low respect, so you have to use the qualifier. Okay, now we're going to move on to the most complicated of the three relational messages, and that's the message of control. And what this message talks about, what this message communicates, is who has power in the relationship in that given moment. So a relational message of high control sends the message that the person speaking wants and takes power. A relational message of low control sends the message that the person speaking wants to give the power away to the other person. So let's look at an example. Gina sent a relational message of low control when she let her boyfriend drive. even though she prefers when he sits in the passenger seat. So by giving up the driving to her boyfriend, Gina sent this relational message of low control. I want you to take control of the car in this moment. I'm giving you control. Control is such a powerful relational message that we're going to break it down even further, okay? So there's two types of control in interpersonal communication. There's conversational control and decision control. Conversational control is when the person talks more, interrupts more, and controls the subject. Well, that's not always all three, right? So what if the person talks less, interrupts less, but they control the subject? It's tricky. The person who controls the subject probably has a higher conversational control. So let me give you an example. Let's say there's two people and they're driving down the street, and one says to the other, hey, I want to hear all about your day. I really missed you yesterday because you worked all day. And the other person says, I don't want to talk about this. Let's talk about the bills we have to pay. Notice how changing the subject is a very controlling message, right? So controlling the subject of these three different ways to have conversational control is the most powerful. But all three of these are types of conversational control. Then there's decision control. This is the person who makes the final decision, right? So even if one person has conversational control, hey, I really want to talk to you about what's going on with your job, and oh, I had this really exciting day, and maybe they're talking a lot and controlling the subject. I'm not quite sure what we should do for dinner. Maybe we should go to a restaurant, or I have some leftovers at home where I could cook you dinner. Let's say the other person in that moment says, we're going home and you are going to make me my favorite dinner. That is decision control, okay? So the person with decision control is the one who makes the final decision.